High up in the misty Ember Mountains, where the clouds were thick as wool blankets and the pine trees grew so tall they tickled the stars, there was a tiny village called Willowmere. It was a cozy, cheerful place. The rooftops were painted red and yellow. The baker made bread that smelled like cinnamon. The children played tag in the meadow every afternoon. And every evening, the old people sat by their fires and told stories about the golden days. But Willowmere had one very unusual neighbor, a sleeping volcano called Mount Grumble. The villagers called it that because, every few months, it would shake and rumble like a giant's tummy after a big meal. Nothing dangerous ever happened. Just a little shake, a little puff of smoke, and then everything went back to normal. The villagers barely even looked up anymore. Evergreen tree, snow-capped mountain evergreen tree. One cold winter morning, young Nora, a 7-year-old girl with bouncy red pigtails and boots that were always muddy, was doing what she did best, exploring places she probably shouldn't. She had snuck away from the village while her grandmother was napping, and now she was climbing the rocky slope just below Mount Grumble's base. Nobody ever comes here, Nora whispered to herself, hopping over a stream. That means there must be something super interesting. She was right. Tucked between two mossy boulders, nestled in a little hollow filled with warm ash, was the most extraordinary egg she had ever seen. It was about the size of a watermelon, deep orange in color, with tiny golden cracks that glowed softly, like the embers of a fire trying not to go out. Whoa, Nora breathed. She reached out slowly and touched the shell. It was warm. Warmer than the sun on a summer's day. And the moment her fingers touched it, the egg shivered. Nora gasped and jumped back. Then, very carefully, she leaned closer. The cracks grew brighter. The egg rocked gently from side to side. A sound came from inside, a tiny, squeaky little sound, like a kitten trying to sneeze. Crack, crack, crack. A tiny claw poked through the shell. Then a snout. Then two enormous, blinking golden eyes stared up at Nora from inside a pile of broken orange shell. It was a baby dragon, tiny enough to fit in Nora's backpack. Its scales were the color of autumn leaves, orange and red and a little bit of gold. Its wings were too small to fly, and its tail was curled up like a question mark. It opened its little mouth and let out a puff of smoke the size of a soap bubble. "Hi," said Nora. The baby dragon blinked. Then it sneezed, and a tiny flame, no bigger than a birthday candle, shot out of its nose. It immediately looked embarrassed. Nora laughed. "I'm going to call you Ember," she said. "And I'm going to take care of you." Ember wobbled over to her on his stubby legs, and climbed right into her arms like he had been waiting for her all along. Sneaking a baby dragon into the village was, it turned out, not as easy as Nora had hoped. She had stuffed Ember into her backpack with only his head sticking out, which she covered with her wool scarf. But Ember did not understand the idea of being quiet. He kept making happy chirping sounds, and twice he sneezed tiny fireballs that singed the edge of Nora's scarf. She managed to get him home without anyone noticing, mostly because the village baker, Mr. Thistlewick, was arguing very loudly with the village goat, which had eaten his best hat, and everyone was watching that instead. Goat top hat face with steam from nose. Nora hid Ember in her bedroom under a pile of blankets. She brought him warm soup, little pieces of bread, and, when those didn't seem to excite him, she tried roasted chestnuts, which he adored. He ate 17 in a row and then hiccuped a small fireball that left a black circle on Nora's ceiling. "We need rules," Nora told him seriously. Ember looked up at her with his big golden eyes, his tail wagging like a happy puppy's. Rule 1. No fire indoors. Ember blinked. Puffed a tiny smoke ring. Nora crossed her arms. Ember made a small, apologetic chirp. Rule 2. Hide under the blankets when Grandma comes in. Ember immediately dove under the blankets and disappeared so completely that Nora couldn't even see a lump. "Perfect," she grinned. For 3 whole days, the secret held. Nora told no one. She sneaked Ember outside at night, in the dark, so he could stretch his little wings and practice breathing fire at rocks. He was getting better at it. The flames were now the size of an orange instead of a grape. But on the 4th day, her grandmother, old Gran Mabel, who was sharp as a tack and could smell mischief from 3 rooms away, walked into Nora's bedroom carrying a stack of clean laundry and came face to face with a baby dragon sitting on Nora's pillow, happily chewing on a sock. There was a long silence. "HM," said Gran Mabel. Ember looked at her. Then he sneezed, producing a perfect tiny smoke ring that floated up and dissolved against the ceiling. Gran Mabel sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "Where," she said very calmly, "did you find a dragon, Nora?" So Nora told her everything. The egg, the glowing cracks, the sneeze, all of it. She waited, terrified, for Gran Mabel to say they had to give him back or take him away. But Gran Mabel just looked at Ember for a long time. Then she said, "In all my 81 years, I have never seen a dragon this far down the mountain." She stroked his little orange head very gently. Ember leaned into her hand and purred like a tea kettle. "That means something, Nora. Dragons don't come down from Mount Grumble without a reason." Nora hadn't thought of that. "What reason?" she asked. Gran Mabel looked at her very seriously. "I don't know yet. But we should pay attention." Over the next week, Ember became part of their home. Gran Mabel was secretly delighted by him. She made him a little bed from an old fire-safe iron pot lined with wool. She taught him to fetch the newspaper. He learned to understand their words, even if he couldn't speak them. He would tilt his head, blink twice for yes, and flick his tail once for no. But there was something else. Something that made Nora uneasy. Every night, Ember would sit at the window, staring up at Mount Grumble, and make a sound she'd never heard before, a low, rumbling hum, deep in his throat. Like he was listening to something nobody else could hear. Spring came slowly to Willowmere. The snow melted into trickling streams. The cherry blossoms bloomed pink and white along the village path. Children hung paper lanterns in their windows, and the whole village smelled like apple blossoms and warm bread. But Ember was not relaxing with the season. He was getting more and more restless. He had grown a little. He was now the size of a medium dog, with wings that could actually lift him a few inches off the ground before he flopped back down. His flames were stronger too. He could now toast a marshmallow from 3 feet away, which he did often, because he loved marshmallows enormously. But the behavior at the window had grown stranger. He no longer just hummed at night. Now he paced. Back and forth, his claws clicking on the wooden floor, his tail lashing in short, agitated strokes. Sometimes he would scratch at the window with one claw, not to get out, but as if trying to point at something. "He's trying to tell us something," Nora said to Gran Mabel one morning over breakfast. She was eating her porridge but watching Ember, who was sitting stiffly at the window, staring at the mountain and making that low, rumbling sound in his throat.
Gran Mabel nodded slowly.
"The mountain has been rumbling more than usual," she said. 3 times in the past week. Usually it's once a month." Nora hadn't noticed. She paid attention to Ember so much that she'd stopped paying attention to other things. But now that Gran Mabel said it, she realized, yes. She could remember the rumblings. The cups rattling on the shelf. The cat hiding under the sofa. The goat refusing to go outside. Warning, volcano warning. The signs were everywhere, but the villagers were not looking. The river that ran through Willowmere, the Silverfen River, had turned slightly murky. Old Tom, the fisherman, grumbled that his fish catch was smaller this week, but he blamed it on the weather. The wells in the north part of the village smelled faintly of something sharp and odd, like burnt matchsticks, but the villagers thought it was just the spring mud. The birds were different too. The robins and sparrows that usually filled the trees on the mountain slope had gone quiet. Flocks of them flew south, away from the mountain, in the middle of the day, which birds never do in spring. Nora noticed all of this because she was paying attention now. She kept a little notebook and wrote everything down. Monday, Ember didn't sleep. Scratched at window 14 times. Tuesday, river murkier. Dead fish near the reeds, 3. Wednesday, big rumble. Lasted about 8 seconds. Ember hid under Gran's bed. Very unusual for him. He is never afraid. That last line gave Nora a cold feeling in her stomach. Ember was a dragon. Dragons were not afraid of much. But something underground, something under Mount Grumble, was scaring him. She went to see the village elder, old Mayor Brogan, a round, cheerful man who was very proud of the village and not very good at worrying. She brought her notebook and told him everything: the river, the wells, the birds, the extra rumblings, and Ember's strange behavior.
Mayor Brogan listened kindly.
Then he patted her on the head, which Nora hated, and said, "It's spring, my dear. Everything gets a little wobbly in spring. Nothing to worry about." He gave her a biscuit and sent her on her way. Nora walked home, furious. She gave Ember the biscuit. Ember ate it in one bite and then looked at her seriously, as if he understood exactly what had happened. Nobody's listening, she said. Ember made a sound, not his usual chirp or hum. This sound was different. It was deep, and it was urgent, and it sent a little ripple of cold air through the room despite the warmth of the season. Then he turned to the window, stared hard at the mountain, and breathed a small stream of fire directly at the glass. Not enough to break it, just enough to leave a perfect, burning outline of a shape. Nora leaned close and looked at the shape on the glass. It was not random. It was clear and deliberate. It was an arrow, pointing down, into the ground. The arrow changed everything. Nora stared at it for a long time. Then she said, "You want to show me something underground?" Ember blinked twice. Yes. Something dangerous. Another double blink. Yes. Nora thought hard. She was 7 years old and reasonably brave, but she was not foolish. Going into a mountain alone was not a good idea. She needed help. And since Mayor Brogan had given her a biscuit and sent her away, she would have to find help elsewhere. She went to find Marco, the blacksmith's son, a stocky 10-year-old who collected rocks and knew more about the mountain geology than any teacher in the village. And she went to find Lily, the healer's granddaughter, a quiet, thoughtful girl of 9 who always carried a lantern and knew 17 kinds of plants that could be used as antidotes for various poisons. Nora did not tell them everything at first. She just said she had discovered something important near Mount Grumble and she needed help. Marco said okay immediately, because he would climb anything. Lily said she'd need to bring her kit and a good map, which she did. Then Nora showed them Ember. Marco stared for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "Brilliant." Lily said, "Can I measure his temperature?" "For science." Ember sneezed a smoke ring in Lily's direction. Lily decided that was a yes. Flashlight Mountain Dragon. The 4 of them, Nora, Marco, Lily, and Ember, set out early the next morning, before the village was awake. Ember led the way with his nose close to the ground, sniffing and huffing, guiding them along the mountain's base toward the east side, which none of the children had ever visited. The east side of Mount Grumble was different from the side the villagers knew. There were no pretty pine trees here. The rocks were dark and glassy, like they had been melted and then hardened again long ago. The air smelled strange, sharp and sulphurous, like struck matches and old metal. Thin wisps of steam rose from cracks in the ground. "This is new," Marco said, looking at the steam cracks. He crouched down and examined the ground carefully. His face went serious. "These fissures weren't here last autumn. The ground has shifted." "What does that mean?" Nora asked. "It means the mountain isn't just rumbling on the surface," Marco said. "Something is moving underneath." Ember had stopped in front of a large dark opening in the mountainside, barely big enough to crawl through. He sniffed it, then looked at the children, then sniffed it again. His scales were standing slightly on end, the way a cat's fur does when it senses something. "He wants us to go in," Lily said. "Into the dark hole in a mountain," Marco said, nodding. "Of course he does." But they went. Lily's lantern lit the way. Ember went first, his scales giving off a faint golden glow that helped more than he probably knew. The tunnel was narrow at first, then wider, leading downward in a slow spiral. They could hear it before they could see it. A deep, heavy sound, like 1,000 drums, very far below. But it wasn't drums. It was water. Not the gentle bubbling of a river. It was the groaning pressure of an enormous amount of water trapped underground, water that had nowhere to go. They came out into a large underground chamber and stopped dead. Before them was an underground lake the color of jade, and above it, the ceiling of the cave was cracked in dozens of places, with enormous sheets of rock hanging down like broken teeth. A hot underground spring had been filling this hidden space for what must have been years. The pressure had built and built. The cracks in the ceiling were new, pushed open by that pressure. And from above those cracks, from the mountain's base, came the roots of Willomere's wells. "The water," Lily whispered. She looked pale. "The water in the village wells, it's been contaminated. The underground spring is mixing with volcanic sulfur. That's what the smell was." Marco pointed at the ceiling with a shaking hand. "And those rocks, if the pressure keeps building, the ceiling collapses. All that water floods upward, right through the village." Nora understood now. This was the hidden danger. Not a volcano erupting dramatically with lava and fire, something quieter. Poisoned water in the wells. A hidden flood building underground, ready to burst upward without warning, in the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep. Ember made that low, urgent sound again. And then he began to pace around the chamber, breathing small controlled flames at specific cracks in the wall, not randomly, but with careful, deliberate precision. What is he doing? Marco asked.
Lily watched Ember closely.
I think, she said slowly, he's showing us where the pressure is highest. They ran back to the village. All three of them were out of breath by the time they burst through the gates, Ember tucked under Nora's arm, his wings flapping uselessly. This time, Nora did not go to Mayor Brogan. She went directly to Marco's father, the blacksmith, a huge, practical man named Joseph, who understood rocks and pressure and the way things broke. Marco explained everything in a breathless rush. Joseph listened without interrupting. Then he asked 3 sharp, precise questions. Then he put on his coat. Get the elder, he told his son, and the watermaster, and wake every person on the north end of the village. Now. Within the hour, half the village was awake, gathered in the square with lanterns, listening to Joseph explain what the children had found. There were many doubters. There were several people who said the children had been imagining things, and one man who said dragons weren't real, at which point Ember, who had been sitting quietly on Nora's shoulder, turned and gave the man a very long, unimpressed look. The man stopped talking. Real or not, said old Gran Mabel loudly, from the back of the crowd, the river water is bad. My granddaughter's notebook has documented it for 2 weeks. The bird migrations are wrong. The wells smell of sulfur. Whether you believe in the dragon or not, do you believe in your own noses? There was a long silence. The wells, said the watermaster slowly, have smelled strange since Tuesday. He looked uncomfortable. And meant to investigate. Investigate now, said Joseph. Crescent moon fire droplet. The plan was simple but dangerous. Joseph explained it to the children and the assembled adults. The underground chamber needed a controlled release. If the pressure was not relieved, the water would find its own way out, violently, suddenly, through the weakest points, which were directly beneath the village wells. But if they could open a safe channel, a new fissure through the east side of the mountain, away from the village, the water could escape harmlessly into the rocky valley below. The problem was the size of the work. The rock was thick. Drilling through it by hand would take days they didn't have. The cracking ceiling made it clear the pressure was close to its limit. It was Lily who said it quietly. Ember could do it. Everyone looked at the small orange dragon on Nora's shoulder. Dragonfire, Lily explained, is much hotter than any flame we can make. If you can heat the rock in the right place, at the fault line Marco identified, the thermal expansion will crack it precisely. A controlled break, not a collapse. That's a big job for a very small dragon, someone said. He already knew where to breathe, Nora said quietly. In the cave. He was already doing it. Ember turned and looked at her. Then he made a sound she had never heard from him before, a long, steady exhale, like a deep breath before something important. He straightened up on her shoulder, all 4 inches of extra height he had. His golden eyes were calm and steady. He was ready. Mountain Dragon Mountain. They went back to the cave, this time with Joseph, 2 other adults with iron tools, Lily with her map, Marco with his geological notes, and Nora with Ember. The rest of the village had been moved to higher ground, to the eastern meadow above the slope, just in case. In the underground chamber, the sounds were worse now. The groaning of the rock overhead was constant. A thin trickle of water had begun seeping through one of the lower cracks, staining the floor dark. We don't have much time, Joseph said. Marco pointed to the east wall, a section of dark rock that sat directly above the rocky valley below, on the opposite side from the village. Here. If we can break through here, the water goes east. Away from everything. Nora knelt and set Ember down on the floor. He was trembling slightly. Not from fear, she realized, from effort. From holding something in. Like a deep breath before a dive. You can do it, she whispered to him. I believe you. Ember looked at her. 2 blinks. Then he turned to the east wall, spread his small wings as wide as they would go, planted his feet, opened his mouth, and breathed. The fire that came out was nothing like his usual candle flicker flames. It was a brilliant, roaring stream of golden white that lit the entire chamber like noon sunlight. The heat slammed against the wall. The rock glowed red, then orange, then white hot at the center. Joseph and the others hammered with their iron tools at the heated spot. The rock cracked. Then cracked again. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the wall split open. Water rushed through. Not toward them, not toward the village, east, through the new opening, pouring in a rushing, hissing torrent down the rocky slope into the empty valley below, steam rising where it hit the cool night air, brilliant and harmless under the stars. The groaning above them stopped. Ember collapsed onto the floor, exhausted, his scales dim. Nora scooped him up immediately. He was too tired to lift his head, but his tail curled weakly around her wrist. "You did it," she whispered into his scales. "You did it, Ember." From far above, through the rock, they could all hear, faintly, the sound of the village. Cheering. By morning, the whole of Willowmere knew what had happened. The watermaster had tested the wells. The sulphur smell was gone. The water was clear and clean. The Silverfen River, which had been murky for 2 weeks, ran silver again by noon. On the east side of the mountain, a new little waterfall tumbled down the rocky slope into the valley, where it would eventually grow into a small, cheerful stream. Mayor Brogan, slightly red in the face, stood in the village square and made a very long speech. Most of it was about how the village had come together. Partway through, someone in the crowd pointed out that it had actually been 3 children and a baby dragon who had done most of the important parts. Mayor Brogan cleared his throat and adjusted his speech accordingly. "We owe our safety," he said, more quietly now, "to those who paid attention when others did not, to those who were curious and brave and refused to stop asking questions, and to a very remarkable creature who knew the danger before any of us did." He looked at Ember, who was sitting on Nora's shoulder, still a little tired, but with his scales glowing warmly in the morning sun. Ember looked back at the mayor with his steady golden eyes. Then he sneezed, and produced, for the first time, a smoke ring big enough for a person to walk through. The village laughed and cheered. Glowing star, dragon, glowing star. That afternoon, the village carpenter built Ember his own little house, a snug stone cottage near Nora's home, with a fireproof floor and a door just his size. The baker made him a tray of 17 roasted chestnuts. The watermaster carved a small plaque for his door. The goat, for reasons of its own, deposited a half-eaten hat on his doorstep. Marco wrote a very detailed report about the underground chamber, the geological fissures, and how dragon fire could be used for controlled thermal fracturing of rock. He was quite proud of it. His teacher gave him full marks and also asked if she could borrow the dragon for a demonstration. Lily collected a sample of the underground spring water and compared it to the well water and the river water for her science notebook. She concluded that early intervention in volcanic contamination events was far better than late response, and also that dragon companions were an underrated early warning system. Nora did not write a report. She sat with Ember on the hill above the village as the sun went down, watching the new waterfall sparkle on the eastern slope. Ember sat very still beside her, his small body warm against her arm, his tail loosely curled around her ankle like a bracelet. "You knew all along," Nora said to him. "Since the first day." Ember looked at her, blinked twice. "Is that why you came down? You hatched early because the danger was coming." He considered this. Then he blinked twice again. Nora thought about that for a long while. A baby dragon, still too small to fly, still learning to control his fire, and yet he had known something was wrong deep in the mountain. He had felt it in his bones, in the way dragons feel the earth's heartbeat. And he had come down from the mountain, to the humans below, because he could not fix it alone. "You needed us," Nora said softly. "And we needed you." She scratched gently behind his earridge, which made him close his eyes and make a sound like a very small thunderstorm trying to purr. That's the best kind of friendship. The stars came out, one by one, over Willowmere. The lanterns in the village windows glowed warm and gold. Somewhere below, Gran Mabel was making soup. Somewhere, the baker was pulling a new batch of cinnamon bread from the oven. Somewhere, Mayor Brogan was practicing how to give shorter speeches. And on the hill above it all, a girl with red pigtails and muddy boots sat beside a small orange dragon with golden eyes, and both of them watched the night arrive over a village that was safe, and whole, and full of light. Ember stretched his wings wide. They were bigger now, just noticeably bigger than yesterday. He tested the air with them, feeling the lift. Not yet. Not tonight. But soon, he would fly. And when he did, Nora had already decided she was going with him. There was so much more of the world to pay attention to. Dragon sparkles house with garden. tilde the end tilde. Remember, the bravest thing you can do is pay attention. And the best friends are the ones who need each other equally.